Vera Papasova is a tough Russian woman in a bleach blonde bob. A former tennis champion, Vera continues her dedication to fitness through Red Bull races, weightlifting, and boot camp classes. In her journalistic career, Vera has interviewed everyone from porn stars to Roger Federer. She is an open and opinionated feminist. As the wellness editor of Teen Vogue, she ran the magazine's sexual assault awareness campaign. She wrote about sexual harassment at Coachella, and she won many journalistic awards. It is my impression that she holds herself and those around her to a high standard. And if you dare to interview her, she's not shy about correcting you, disagreeing with you, and saying things to other journalists like,
"I don't think that's the right question."
But during the 2024 presidential election, as a journalist, Vera was running into a problem. She had been raised as a leftist, but now called Democrats, and I quote, "fucking losers." She had become Republican curious and tried to interview Trump supporters, but she found that in New York, and especially if she made herself known as a journalist for a mainstream media magazine, then many Republicans directly would not speak to her. At this time, Vera was single, and she decided to make a profile on a conservative dating app as her alter ego, Veronica, to seek out the extreme right ends of the political spectrum and let them take her out on dates so that she could ask them about their dating preferences, what they want out of a relationship, and what they expect from women. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Siobhan Breyer Aguilar. I'm a writer and editor, so I take famous pieces of media, typically articles or books, I critique them, and then I use them as a vehicle to discuss maybe like some concepts that were mentioned in the article. So in this video, I will summarize and analyze Vera Papasova's experience dating and writing about men in the alt-right. I will critique the article, and I will let that lead us into a video essay style discussion about whether or not it is a wise idea to date or marry people who disagree with us politically. Sound good? Okay, let's get into it. I'm editing, and I had a quick note. The reason I'm not looking at the camera is because I'm reading an article out loud that I published on my website. So if you want to just read the article along with the video, or if you prefer to read instead of watching the video, I have the link in my description to the article itself. Vera's article is called "I Spent Nearly a Year on a Conservative Dating App as a Liberal. Here's what I learned." In it, Vera explains how on the conservative dating app as Veronica, she matched with 60 men and ended up going on dates with 14 of them. She prioritized choosing men who were on the extreme right or the alt-right, and she emphasizes in interviews that the men she met on these dates are not a representation of the overall Republican Party or Trump's base as a whole. She intentionally matched with men who had things in their profiles like alt-right conspiracy theorist. On the dates, there was one man whom it seems like Vera genuinely liked. She describes him as her favorite, and she assigns him the pseudonym Jared. Vera followed a strict safety protocol on her dates, and she ran a background check on everyone she planned to meet with. But when she ran a background check on Jared, she found that just a few years prior, he had sent her an email personally promising to, quote, "kill her slowly." He had sent this email to her at a time when she was a public champion for feminism, so she didn't know if he would recognize her personally or if he had simply found her email on a 4chan forum. When Vera met up with Jared, she was surprised to discover that he was shy, soft-spoken, and even sweet and self-reflective. He didn't seem to recognize her or remember that he had sent her death threats. He was very tall, a former D1 athlete. He described a hobby of his that started during the pandemic where he went alone to a series of restaurants around New York to try their desserts, and he kept a ranking of his favorite spots. She actually found Jared so interesting that he was one of the few men who she went on multiple dates with. But when Jared started to talk about politics, he grabbed the table and his leg began to shake. He shouted, quote, "Liberal white women are a plague on our society," close quote. He drank 11 iced coffees over the course of their date. At one point, he told a story about how a group of protesters harassed him for wearing a MAGA hat, and he reenacted the scene by standing up in the restaurant and shouting at Vera the same way that the protesters shouted at him. People in the restaurant got frightened by his shouting and cautiously watched Vera and Jared for the rest of their date. Vera says that when Jared talked about politics, his eyes changed and his behavior became erratic. He said to her, quote, "If we lived in a different time, we would be hanging white liberal whores in the town square and dragging them through the street for the lies that they spread," close quote. Vera didn't say this in the article, but in an interview she mentioned that Jared did share that he had many concussions and traumatic brain injury symptoms from his years of playing a contact sport. Vera asked Jared to take a deep breath with her, which he did. He calmed down and again sat at the table, but later in the date, as Vera's hand rested on the table, he grabbed her wrist and his eyes changed again. He said, quote, "White liberal women say horrible things about me and make everyone hate me and think I'm a bad person," close quote. Vera says that at this point he was no longer looking at her, but rather staring off into the distance as if he were in a trance. Vera asked, "What did they say about you?" And Jared snapped out of it and said, "Oh, not me. I meant Donald Trump." Vera says that he repeated this problem over a few dates together as she got to know him. He would speak about Donald Trump in the first person as if he himself were Donald Trump. Vera writes, quote, "It became clear to me that he truly loved Trump, not just because he identified with Trump, the politician, but because he identified with Trump, the person, being considered bad by progressive standards," close quote. On their second date, Jared remained calm the whole time. He described his childhood in the Northeast. He came from a nice family. He went to a good school. He was a sports prodigy, but he started drinking and doing drugs when he was a teenager. Then he says, quote, "Something really bad happened," close quote, "so he got sober." Vera calculates that he was still dealing with addiction when he sent her death threats. Jared said, quote, "For sports, I created an alter ego that helped me harness the violent and dominant energy that I needed to tap into this stronger part of me. That was how I could do more than I thought was possible. The problem was I couldn't turn it off. As long as I was winning, my coaches didn't care what I did. So I was always in it, always partying, anxious about guys from another school, showing up to a party to beat the shit out of my teammates and me. I would drink and do drugs to calm myself down, and then we would go beat up the other guys," close quote. This quote, while troubling, was one of my favorite parts of the article because it gives us some insight into how an otherwise normal and even talented person can become radicalized, and it speaks to a greater societal trend of how institutions and role models can encourage young men to foster violent or aggressive tendencies so long as it benefits the institution, like a nation's military or a college football team, even if that comes at great personal cost to the young man in the form of traumatic brain injury or mental health problems, or in the case of Jared, loneliness. Because it will be very difficult for him to find a life partner if he can't control his violent outbursts, even on a first date. Jared also shares that he spends weekends helping young men with mental health problems. On their last date, Vera and Jared were walking through a park when Vera told him that they couldn't keep seeing each other because she disagreed with many of his beliefs. Jared was confused, and he told Vera that he thought they had agreed on most things. She said they did not agree on most things, and he would have recognized that if he asked her any questions about herself. He attempted to kiss her, but she avoided it, and they never saw each other again. This video is not sponsored, so I just wanted to take a quick little break to kind of talk about some random housekeeping stuff. So every Sunday, I have this ritual where I get like dressed to the nines and I go to a cafe and I write. I'm kind of like control freaky about it. I think about my outfit all week, and then I didn't want to ruin my outfit with a backpack. And so this brand, Teddy Blake, sent me a bag. They actually didn't ask me to talk about them, but I've been so happy with the bag that I just wanted to shout them out. It fits my laptop, and I really like the way that it goes with my outfits, so I'll leave a link to them in the description. Maybe other people will like it too. The other thing is that I have a Patreon that I'm like pretty active on, but I would say take advantage of it now. Like, get on there. We're meeting a lot of really cool people, a lot of really, really bright people. On the first level, you get access to a bunch of articles without paywalls that we discuss in the comments. At the second level, you can join our book club. We have a book club that we meet up with every month. We vote on the book, and we've been having some really cool discussions. Soon we'll be meeting up to discuss East of Eden by John Steinbeck. And at the top level, you can join the Writers Club, and you can send me about 1,000 words of writing that you put together yourself, and I will give you a personalized edit. Obviously, that last level is what takes me the most time, so I might not be able to do it so frequently in the future. So as I said, take advantage of it while you can. I think that it's a pretty cool perk. My Patreon plans are very affordable. I wanted them to be. And if you want to follow along for free, I also have a newsletter that you can sign up for on my website, Siobhan Breyer. That's SIOBHANBRIER.com. And let's get back into the video. While Vera was on the app, she made a note of a few patterns in what conservative men on this application were searching for in their dating life. Here are some of those patterns. Men who called themselves MAGA bros, men who described themselves as European, looking for their submissive European dream girls. Vera had European in quotes, so I presume they were not actually from Europe, but were rather white Americans looking for submissive white wives. Multiple people labeled themselves on their profiles as white supremacists. Vera met multiple men who believed that women should not have the right to vote. On a few profiles, she saw men who compared the violence on January 6th with how violent they are in bed. Many considered themselves conspiracy theorists. Various men clarified on their profiles that they believe in two genders only. Many profiles used the word pureblood, meaning that they are not vaccinated against COVID-19. Multiple profiles mentioned a hatred of women with pink hair. Many profiles designated themselves as anti-feminists. Vera says that she asked her matches about their relationship expectations and family values, and she writes, quote, "Each man seemed to know exactly what he was looking for in a wife and articulated it before we even met. She was typically an unvaccinated Christian white woman willing to quit her job and commit to homeschooling children. Her hobbies might include tending to a garden and feeding the animals." She says that in her full year of dating conservative men, she never paid for a date, so she gives them credit for that. She wore things like floral dresses and cardigans on dates so as not to blow her cover. She says that a lot of the men she dated worked in finance and actually made a good living. Many of them came from educated backgrounds and even maintain a public image with their friends and coworkers in New York as generally liberal people. Then they go home and get on the internet and have neo-Nazi beliefs. But they learn how to hide that so that they aren't rightfully ostracized. Another date that Vera had was with a man whom she called Tom. They met up outside of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and she found him sitting on the steps wearing a tweed suit and reading a paperback book. Vera describes the scene. Quote, "Veronica," Tom said, standing up and slipping his book into his jacket pocket. He offered me his hand to go up the stairs like a prince ready to catch me if I lost my balance. Although I walk up 5 flights to my apartment every day, sometimes while carrying heavy things, I placed my palm in his. It's so refreshing to meet someone open to doing this instead of drinking at a bar, he said. That part felt nice for me too. Close quote. Tom informed Vera that he's not religious, but he would like his kids to have biblical values. Some of his more conservative beliefs may have come from the fact that when his mother died from cancer in high school, the women in his church cooked food for him and his father and took care of him in that way. Vera asked Tom about a term that she had seen online among women who called themselves anti-feminists. The term was biblical patriarchy. Tom responded by reciting from memory the verse in the Bible that calls on women to submit to their husbands. Quote, "Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church." Close quote. Tom continued, quote, "Women should be submissive to their husbands, and some people believe they should be trained." Close quote. This is again on Date 1. Vera remembered that she had seen on Tom's profile that he was anti-white genocide, so she asked him if his future wife had to be white. He replied, quote, "I believe on principle that white people have a right to maintain a positive identity, and our collective well-being must be maintained with healthy families. White guilt is poisoning kids," close quote. So, not what she asked, but I think we can take that as a yes. On another date, Vera describes meeting a man whom she calls Brian. She says she wore a long black ribbed dress and met him at a wine bar. When she met him, he put his hand on her lower back and said, "I love that you dressed up for me." She asked him what he looked for in a relationship. He replied, emphasizing that he's looking for a woman willing to fulfill her natural feminine roles. Vera asked what he thinks is the natural masculine role, and Brian replied by saying, quote, "A real man provides discipline, and any talking back or acting out is asking for punishment," close quote. Vera asked, besides obedience, what does a real man need to feel loved? And he said, quote, "The feminists convinced women to be dominant. Where's the love in taking away a man's masculinity? Love isn't always in the cards when people don't know their roles. I'm trying to make enough money to support a family, which means I need someone who can be home and take care of everything there," close quote. So his position is that he is not yet making enough money to support a family, but he's trying to, and for that reason he deserves to be with a woman who doesn't have a job and takes care of his home. I wonder if he would accept in her place a woman who stays home and tries to cook and clean, but falls short. It's almost like he's holding her to a standard of dichotomous gender roles that even he himself is incapable of meeting. On another date, Vera describes meeting a man who it sounds like was drinking a lot. When she asked him why his last relationship came to an end, he said, quote, "My previous girlfriend killed our child," close quote. Vera said, "Like she's in jail for murder?" Her date replied, "No, but she should be. She got an abortion and killed our child without asking me." Vera went on a date with a man in his 40s whom she called Ron. He told her that he's passionate about funding women's health clinics. Vera said, "Like Planned Parenthood?" He replied, "That's funny," and explained that he was talking about crisis pregnancy centers, which are centers that typically have religious affiliations that target pregnant women to encourage them to not have abortions, sometimes through sharing medically incorrect information designed to frighten the women. Vera continues, quote, "When I asked Ron how many abortions he'd prevented with his donations, he said, over 1,000. When I asked how many of those women died as a result of their pregnancy, he said, if they picked up a Bible, God would show mercy." Vera describes another date by writing, quote, "At a chic omakase place, Matthew, with an asterisk to show that his name has been changed, 25, from New Jersey, was going off about how we should have never let a woman be head of the Secret Service. With each course, I fired off questions about his upbringing. He mentioned online groups where there were others like him, the kind where people whose radical to me beliefs find validation, and even more than validation, identity itself. Matthew later revealed that he has a swastika tattoo."
And I was like, "What is it?" And he was like, "Well, what do you think it is?" And I was like, "It looks like a swastika." He was like, "Yeah."
This wasn't in the article, but in interviews, Vera explains that Matthew brought her to a political meeting. She says that as a journalist, she can't call this meeting a neo-Nazi meeting because they didn't call it that in her presence. Matthew instead presented this group to her as a meeting of free thinkers. But when she got to the meeting, the people there didn't discuss politics at all, and instead complained about their girlfriends and wives, and offered each other tips as to how to train their partners to be more submissive. The following few sentences are describing some triggering stuff for domestic violence if you want to skip ahead. One man complained that his girlfriend kept breaking his rules by going out in co-ed groups, even though he had prohibited that behavior from her. So the other men in the group gave him tips to make her obey him. These tips included things like withholding money from her, not acknowledging her existence for 48 hours, and implementing a punishment and reward system. They described how he could force her to have sex with him if she refused. Vera offers her own brief interpretation for what may have led these men to fringe political ideologies. She writes, quote, "A lot of my dates seemed to express that they felt lost without a solid definition of what a man is, and even if they did feel like they checked all the boxes for some specified male roles, they still felt like they were getting left behind. Many of their ideologies seemed to be built on this perceived rejection and a desire to revert back to how things used to be. A conclusion I came to is that these men feel like most people, including the mass media, don't take the time or have no interest in taking the time to understand them or where they come from. Valid or not, this seemed to compound their feelings of isolation, which in turn bred a lack of curiosity on their part, furthering their own intolerances." Close quote. In the article, Vera ultimately comes to the conclusion that she would not be able to date anyone with alt-right political beliefs, and she admits that she struggled to even feel sexual attraction to them. Quote, "I didn't feel that any of the men I dated were that interested in me as a person or where I came from either. I rarely got questions like, 'Why are you Republican curious? What drew you to our dating app? What are your family values?' I wondered for a while if this was supposed to be my role. Should I have helped them create a framework for approaching relationships with more curiosity, one that might ultimately lead them toward a more inclusive kind of mindset? Maybe, but it was never my intention to save these men from their hatred. Plus, after all these dates, I started to answer my own questions. I was too different from them, even if that was due to circumstance and upbringing, in ways that made romantic or sexual attraction impossible. Despite my willingness to be open to anything, none of my dates progressed beyond talking." Close quote. In interviews, Vera summed up her experience by saying,
"They're the most insecure men I've ever sat down with. It was really difficult to have some of these dates because they were so insecure, because they don't really know who they are and they don't know how to figure that out.
Before we move on, I must again mention that Vera had a very strict safety protocol when going on these dates. This isn't an experiment that you should try at home, as it were. My biggest critique of this article is that I felt like Vera struggled to define the purpose of this study. In the subheading, she poses the question, have extreme political ideologies divided the dating pool? In paragraph 3, she says she went on these dates in an attempt to not just date, but also understand men in the alt-right. In paragraph 4, she says she wants to figure out where they were coming from and to see if they were misunderstood. But then in paragraph 5, she kind of changes her tune slightly, and she writes, quote, as politics in our country grows more divisive, as the internet fuels hardline cultural ideologies and social discord, as like-minded communities double down on rejecting anything different, is it possible for romantic connections between contrasting groups to even exist? Could dating be a way to help forge an understanding of value systems, of experiences that drive beliefs that could start to bridge the dissonance? Or at the very least, could it teach me about my own rules of attraction? Could I ever be physically enticed by or even intimate with someone with very different political views? Close quote. And that is a very different question. You can understand someone's political beliefs, but not necessarily want to date them. She also posed, by my count, 4 different questions in that last paragraph, which muddies our thesis and purpose. Then around the middle of the article, which I think is late in the article to be still clarifying your objective, we get yet another paragraph stating another slightly different why. Vera writes, quote, part of what I was trying to explore and push back against is the idea that a person's identity can be reduced to a one-dimensional entity based solely on who they voted for. Now, more than ever, we think we can tell everything about someone on the other side just because they wear a red hat or a blue I voted t-shirt. The job I'd assigned myself was to dig deeper, to learn more about these men on the other side of me, way on the other side in most cases. And as someone who cares about bringing people together, I wondered whether it was me who had been excluding them, close quote. So now we are not just trying to explore, but also push back against the idea that your political party defines you. I'm sure you're beginning to see how having multiple theses in our article can make it hard for us to be successful as writers. It's almost like setting too many goals for yourself, so you spread your writing thin, and instead of meeting one goal well, we struggle to meet 3 goals at all. If we distill the somewhat unclear writing, this article told me that its goals were 1, to see if we can understand people in the alt-right, 2, to see if we can fall in love with people who disagree with us politically, and 3, to push back against the idea that we can define people based on who they voted for. So to decide if this article was successful, let's look at it according to its stated goals. 1, did this article help you understand people in the alt-right better? For me personally, I would say that in some cases, yes, it could have helped, but in general, not really. I was hoping that because Vera was getting to know these people in an intimate context, she would be able to learn things about them that we couldn't learn from just interacting with them online when they might be trying to be provocative. In interviews, Vera called these people, quote, the most insecure men she had ever met, close quote. And while I think that's interesting, I also know a lot of people who are insecure who don't become Nazis. I wanted to know a little bit more about their stories. My favorite parts of the article were about Jared because he described in his own words how he had become radicalized. And he also appeared in this article as a somewhat complex character. On one hand, he says these horrible, violent things, but on the other hand, he volunteers with mental health organizations. I would have liked to hear some of the background of the other men as well. Do they have families? Do their families agree with them? Have they been ostracized because of their radical beliefs? Was there a traumatic event that could have led them to isolate themselves? Many of them came across as almost cartoonishly evil, and I think that it's fine to portray them that way if that was our writer's experience, but then I wouldn't state the purpose of the article to understand the other side better, only to write about them in such a one-dimensional way. 2, did this article help you understand if you can fall in love with someone who disagrees with you politically? I think that of the 3 questions, this was the one that the writer was probably the most successful in answering because she ended the article by essentially saying, I now understand these people better, but I would struggle to date or feel attraction to them. She did talk about herself quite a bit in this article and her personal compatibility with these men rather than discussing in general terms, can we fall in love across party lines? Can love be a way to bridge the gap, these questions she posed? So I do think that perhaps she should have revised her thesis slightly to say, I want to see if I personally can be attracted to members of the alt-right party. And I say that for two reasons. One, because whether or not Vera Papasova, as this super disciplined, career-driven New York City single woman in her 30s, can fall for someone who wants her to be a trad wife isn't really relevant to whether or not anyone who disagrees politically can fall in love with each other. I don't think any of these men were going to lasso and domesticate this like buff dime who was literally close personal friends with the president of Planned Parenthood. The second reason I would have revised her thesis is because this wasn't really an article about whether or not a Democrat could date a Republican. This was an article about dating members of the alt-right, some of whom are actually further right on the political spectrum than Donald Trump. They are in a category of their own, a category where extremely misogynistic beliefs are the norm and where their politics likely infect nearly every aspect of their lives. 3, did this article push back against the idea that we can define people based solely on whom they voted for? I think this was the aspect of the article that I most took issue with. The writer seemed to want to argue at first that we can't define people based on whom they voted for, but concluded at the end of her study that we can. She did, of course, come to this conclusion after intentionally choosing to date people who define themselves by their politics. If I were her editor, I would have removed the parts of the article where our writer sort of waxes poetic about not defining people based on their politics. Not because I disagree with her points, but because I feel that an article about not defining people by their politics would be a different article entirely. Instead, this article almost read as why you can and should define people by their politics while dating, because conservative men are crazy and insecure. If she wanted to make the point that you cannot date people by their politics, then I think that she, one, chose the wrong men. Like I said, these are more cult members than just like men generally on the right. And 2, she should have written more about their lives beyond their politics. And to conclude my critique, if the point of the article was to get some interesting gossip about how men in the alt-right date, then the article was successful. It was fascinating to learn about these strange characters, but as writers, we must be honest and succinct about our goals. And given how extensive and dangerous the research process was for this article, I would have liked if she went a little deeper than just, they're crazy and wrong and I'm not attracted to them. One comment on this article on Reddit said, quote, "It's an interesting read and the author has some keen perspective. Ultimately, though, I don't like these articles. It feels like it adds to the mystique of the millennial male conservative without any substantive conclusions. It intentionally glamorizes this subculture and only feeds fuel to the fire of lying white liberal women. Further, she spends more time writing about her perspective on them rather than their perspective on the world. I don't need undercover columnists telling me how angry and misguided they are. I know that they're angry and misguided. It's not a useless piece, but it's the journalistic equivalent of a cult documentary, entertaining in a look how fucked up they are kind of way, but it doesn't really move the conversation forward." Another comment said, "I don't know if I'm online too much, but this article doesn't say anything new, does it? The guys she went on dates with were mostly radicalized whack jobs who weren't interested in her apart from her ability to birth children and be a mythical homemaker. Big surprise." Close quote. Now, I wanted to say one thing that I really liked about this article, and I think that Vera has done well for a lot of her journalistic career. Growing up, me personally, Catholic school, Catholic household, I learned that the ultimate moral standard was the golden rule. You know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I learned that empathy was a celebrated and encouraged trait, and that we should have empathy even for those who do us harm, turn the other cheek. And while I think that empathy can be very useful in coming to understand, explain, and even predict the actions of others, sometimes in relationships, excess empathy for people who hurt you can make you remarkably vulnerable. When I was researching a YouTube video that I made about the author Cormac McCarthy and how he groomed a teenager, I read a study about the main reasons that people go back to abusive partners or spouses after getting hurt by them. Aside from more predictable reasons like financial dependence or social pressure, one of the biggest predictors was how much the victim empathized with or identified with their abusive spouse. Abusive partners can recognize your empathy and use it to manipulate you. In a circumstance like that, it can actually be a very necessary survival skill to learn how to turn off your empathy. Too much empathy can also sometimes cause us to over-intellectualize cruel or unjust actions from others when their motivation could have actually been very simple. Another article that I read when I was researching the Cormac McCarthy video talked about a study where they asked men who had been convicted of domestic violence why they had hurt their wives. They asked them, what are the benefits of being abusive? A person who is in a relationship with one of these abusive men might twist themselves into pretzels to try to justify their behavior, saying things like, well, he had a tough home life and it was all he knew, or he doesn't want to do it but I made him because I upset him, or deep down he really loves me and he wants what's best for me. But when they asked this group of abusers what the benefits were of attacking their wives, the reasons were actually quite straightforward. They said things like, and this is kind of bleak, like, there's a trigger warning on this. If I hit her, then I can feel superior. It keeps the relationship going because she's too scared to leave. I can get money. I can get sex. I get total control of decision making. I can use her money for drugs. I get power. She's an object. I get a robot babysitter, maid, sex, food. Ego booster, get her money again. Get her to quit her job so she can take care of the house. I can decide how the money is spent again. I can buy the toys I want. She works for me. I don't have to help out. Don't have to get up, take out garbage, watch kids, do dishes, get up at night with kids, do laundry, change diapers, clean house, bring kids to appointments and activities, mop floors, clean refrigerator. I get to make the rules and break them when I want. I can convince her she's nuts, convince her she's unattractive, convince her she's to blame, convince her she's the problem. I'm the king of the castle. Have someone to unload on, have someone to bitch at, get her to drop charges, get her to support me to her family, my family, cops, judge, prosecutors, etc. So as you can see, sometimes I think that we afford mean, abusive people more psychoanalysis than they perhaps deserve. And I think I have to mention that if you didn't already notice, how similar some of the language that these abusive men use is to the alt-right men that Vera spoke to in this article. If somebody is talking about you the way that the men talk in that study and the way that many of the men spoke about women in Vera's article, I believe that the best thing that you can do for yourself, your family, and your well-being, some would argue the most morally good thing to do, is to turn your empathy off, forget your golden rule training, and get out. I still don't like it when people go to the opposite extreme of empathy and say, I don't owe anybody anything, because I don't think that's true. I do still think that you owe everyone a basic level of decency and respect, but you do not owe anyone your sexual attraction. You don't owe anyone a romantic relationship, especially if they don't even respect you enough to believe that you deserve autonomy over your own life.
One more thing, when they call you a bitch, say thank you. Thank you very much.
I think that Vera did a great job of showing that. One person who read this article left a comment, quote, I think a lot of the cultural discourse around modern gender war stuff really overcomplicates things and tries to find more sophisticated or sympathetic explanations for why these men think and act the way they do. Intentionally or not, I think this article actually lays it out extremely cleanly. For a long time, women were not afforded respect. Their needs and desires were considered subordinate, if not completely irrelevant. Thanks to the gains of feminism, that is not as true as it once was, and women in many parts of the world have significantly more entitlement to respect and autonomy, and these guys don't like that. It's really that simple. There's no version of the appeal to women to give guys like this a chance, or to not judge them so harshly, or to change their standards, or however else you want to dress it up, that isn't actually just asking women to put up with someone who doesn't respect her as a person. For the other benefits of a relationship, ? And I'm kind of tired of pretending like there's something else going on, close quote. In this story, Vera was able to portray these men as dangerous without over-intellectualizing their motivations. She also showed how their political values dominated the personal realm and affected what they expect from women. This portrayal from Vera can be beneficial to women who might still be interested in dating men in this alt-right cult, thinking, well, politics isn't everything, or maybe I can save him. So that, to clarify, my critique isn't that Vera didn't have more empathy for these men. My issue is that she painted the purpose of the article as if it were about reaching across the aisle and then didn't really do that. I hope that makes sense. It's a writing critique, not a personal critique. I don't think that in real life, Vera has to have more understanding for these people who never extended her the same courtesy. All of that said, after reading this article, I don't feel hatred towards these men. I'm not enraged by their opinions. I'm choosing to not be upset about it. They are perfect strangers to me, and I believe that that the bravado and the rage bait online can prevent us from seeing these men as what they really are, which is victims of a bigger system. Social media companies in the United States have been allowed by the government to knowingly engineer their products to be addictive, not beneficial and educational to a voting populace, addictive. And rage and anger and fear are what keep our attention glued to these devices. And people like Charlie Kirk and Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes and even Donald Trump recognize that and use it to make themselves more wealthy and powerful, especially in a country like the United States, where car dependency keeps us away from local social circles, where a lack of government social supports like free healthcare makes us feel like we need to work all the time to make enough money to literally just survive, and where essentially unregulated food and other substances are making us constantly anxious. It is no wonder that people, especially young people, are starved of social connection and authenticity. So we act as if influencers are our social circle, and famous influencers are just the most effective foot soldiers at making you addicted to social media and putting more money in tech oligarchs' pockets. It doesn't matter if what they say is true. It only matters that it makes you more addicted to your screen. And many of these men and the people they hurt are victims of that. Recently, a young man contacted the influencer Nick Fuentes and said that he is in love with his girlfriend, but he worries about marrying her because she's Dominican and his children wouldn't be white.
What do you want for your life? Do you want Dominican children?
Like, that is some bleak shit. But hey, at least the owners of social media platforms have more money than God. I also want to give Vera major credit for her bravery during this study. We even saw in the article that there were multiple times that she had to de-escalate dangerous situations. And although she had people helping her with safety during the dating process, I'm sure that there are men she dated who heard about this article after it was published and were enraged by it, and I'm sure she knew that would happen and she went forward with her writing anyway, which is tough as fuck. But I still think that the main question posed in this article is an interesting one. Should you date people who disagree with you politically? In 2025, when politics are so polarized, is it even possible to fall in love with people who vote differently from you? And I'm not talking about people who go to neo-Nazi meetings and who don't think women should have jobs, but let's be honest about the fact that while most Gen Z women who voted for Kamala, most Gen Z men who voted for Trump. And this is happening in a lot of countries. People are having trouble dating because their partners have political opinions that aren't compatible with theirs. I feel this article didn't answer these questions, but let's try to answer them here. In 1948, a short story called The Lottery by an author named Shirley Jackson was published in The New Yorker. The story depicts a small town of about 300 people as they go through their yearly tradition that they call the lottery. Everyone in town gathers in the town square almost as if for a church picnic, and they all select slips of paper from a big black box. Finally, when everyone in the town gets paper slips, everyone's is blank except for one woman, a young mother of 3 named Tessie. Tessie's slip has a black dot on it. So, as is custom, the person who drew the losing slip of paper, in this case Tessie, is promptly stoned to death. So Tessie is murdered by everyone in her village, including her neighbors, friends, husband, and young children. The story seems to serve as a warning that all of us are capable of acts that may seem horrifying out of context, so long as those acts have social support and years of precedent in our social traditions. This warning is as terrifying as it is true. We would all love to read The Lottery and think that we would be the exception. We would go against our families and institutions, and we would prefer to be stoned before we stoned another. But a quick look at history demonstrates that even otherwise kind and morally sound people are capable of hurting and even killing, especially when some greater institution labels their victims as outsiders. Even institutions that were designed to maintain a high moral standard, like churches, have become our social justification, both historically and in the modern world, to hurt or kill our fellow man. But those social institutions that separate all of us humans into neat in-groups and out-groups don't just have to be churches. I've seen people in the same breath criticize the brainwashed nature of churchgoers, then turn around and exhibit the same exclusionary behaviors in the name of politics, a gang affiliation, gender, race, even in the name of a sports team or a celebrity fandom. Now that much of our social lives are online, there is no shortage of passionate microgroups that will be happy to give you an excuse to be cruel to other people for being different from you. Today, as we talk about in-groups and out-groups, I especially want to discuss political affiliation. I don't think that it's a coincidence that Shirley Jackson wrote The Lottery in 1948, likely in part to the shock of seeing 2 world wars incite and justify large-scale human-on-human interspecies violence. As Yuval Noah Harari pointed out in his book *Sapiens*, if an alien landed on Earth before the world wars, they would have no clear or visible reason, no natural phenomenon, no fight for resources that would explain why all of these human beings suddenly killed all of these other human beings. Political affiliation that divides us into in-groups and out-groups can take humans who are otherwise thoughtful and gentle, or at least civil toward their common man, and cause them to commit despicable acts of violence, or at least institutions can harness and justify and organize violent urges that we are all born with on account of us ultimately being animals, not gods. Ages ago, I remember becoming curious about what makes people stereotype other groups, or maybe become racist or sexist, or in any other way organize themselves into in-groups and out-groups. I remember wondering if it was because we were once hunter-gatherers who needed to fight against and exclude any groups of wanderers who weren't of our own tribe, but I looked it up and I learned that that's actually not true. Research has revealed that among early groups of humans, when they encountered other wandering tribes in the wild, they shared intel and resources and gifts. But the same article said that studies have found that when people start to feel stressed or threatened, they become more exclusionary. They start to exhibit more behaviors like racism or sexism or other phobias or stereotypes. For example, if I'm a visibly gender nonconforming person and I develop the belief that all Christian people will hurt, judge, or exclude me based on the way that I look, then am I stereotyping Christian people? Sure. There are probably Christian people who wouldn't be hateful toward me, but I've seen it happen and I feel worried for my safety because of that prior anxiety that I mentioned. Then the logical conclusion will be that it's better for my health and well-being to stay away from that out group and stick with my in group. And the more threatened or at risk in the world I feel, the more I will stick to my niche in group. The issue is that the in-group, out-group model doesn't always protect your safety in the way we often hope that it will. I saw a cube on social media that I can't find now, so I'll draw it. Let's say I have a religious way of thinking. And if you're not looking at your screen, what I have here is a sort of box, and I've portioned off people who are in the same religion as me to represent this good guys, bad guys way of thinking. And I've also portioned off the people who are not in my religion. I might think that these are the good guys, this is where I'm safe, these are the people who are going to heaven, and these are the people who are in all these other religions in the world that haven't seen the light and that are dangerous. But what this diagram did was it then portioned off part of this box into a different section. They used a different color to represent people who are really dangerous. So maybe we can just say that orange represents people who would hurt you, who would do harm to you. And what this diagram that I saw did was then create a different section, which was over on the side of the box. And because it was on the side, it created an overlap between bad people who are in my in-group. And so for the case of this exercise, we'll say dangerous people who are in my in-group. And I might trust them because they're in my in-group, and I might think that they're the good guys. And I might distrust a lot of really good people who might be very beneficial to my life because they're not in my religion. Maybe you're not religious and you think, well, this doesn't really apply to me. So I want to take a different model. And I've split this now up into a pretty common way of thinking among at least a lot of people who I know, and probably a form of thinking that I've had before too, which is that the good guys are the people who vote like me. In my case, that would be the American left. And the bad guys are the people who don't vote like me. If we again kind of split up the people who are maybe really dangerous, some might say that this could be a more accurate representation of reality. Many people watching this video might resist this conflation, this idea that some of us treat our political in-group in the same way that a religious zealot might treat other members of their own religion. And in many cases, I think that resistance is fair. Your religious affiliation typically comes from where you were born and who your family is, especially in the case of ethno-religions. If you are born in a Buddhist country, you are much more likely to be Buddhist than if you are born in in a Muslim country. This is why it wouldn't be fair or justified for a benevolent God to send you to hell or heaven essentially just because of where you were born. Politics, on the other hand, does involve more of a choice and tends to change more throughout life, with events like marriage, university, and travel having an impact on what political party you affiliate with. But I am still uncomfortable with how quickly we label all people who voted differently from us as evil or foolish. Are there people who voted for Donald Trump because they are hateful and angry? Yeah, I think that's safe to assume. But there are also people who voted for him just because MAGA is their in-group, and maybe they never had the chance to question that belief set. It is, in a way, a relief when someone I like has the same political leanings as me. I did personally choose to marry someone who aligns with me politically, but I've met people on the left, so people in my in-group, who are racist or classist or exclusionary and embody the qualities that they claim to oppose. And I have also met people on the right who were tolerant and welcoming. I recently created a poll on my YouTube channel asking my subscribers if they would date someone who didn't align with them politically. And one comment said, quote, "You'll have to trust me when I say that I'm very socially liberal. It astounds me how fellow liberals can't fathom conservatives. Consider that most modern liberals are exceedingly privileged, more than most conservatives," close quote. I was curious about whether or not that was true, so I looked it up, and typically urban, highly educated, wealthy people in the United States do have left-leaning ideals. According to OpenSecrets.org, high-dollar donors give to both parties, but Democratic candidates often raise more from wealthy urban areas like New York, LA, San Francisco, while smaller donations favor Trump and MAGA Republicans more, which reflects more of a working class populist base. This chart depicts that blue counties contribute 71% of the money to the United States GDP. Now, whether or not Trump actually shows up for a working class base is a different conversation, but I know that in my case, my left-leaning beliefs have been influenced by my education, my parents' education, my grandparents' education, and by the fact that I've lived outside of the United States for long tracts of time. And I do think it would be intellectually dishonest of me to then turn around and criticize people for not having the same opinions as me if many of those opinions came from privileges that I've been afforded. And I am uncomfortable with the rhetoric of some people on the left who treat everyone who disagrees with them as villains and brandishes this moral superiority almost as if it were a class indicator. The New York Times, which I love, it's full of stories like this. Stories that don't seem to realize how much of their ethics or open-mindedness is really just wealth. Your son doesn't like eggs? We'll have him visit a dozen French chefs, dear. He'll come around. Dear ethicist, my husband's family trust owns and collects income from an ice holding facility, and I feel just horrible about it. And of course, there are absolutely people who are liberals and leftists not because they want to posture about the moral superiority of a wealthy in-group, but because they believe in principles like correcting injustices and speaking out against violence. But let's also keep it a buck and recognize that there are people who treat their democratic beliefs and their cultural knowledge as a form of social capital, their ticket to an elite in-group that donates to the proper causes and uses the right words and judges those who don't. A social club where you've never had to sacrifice your moral high ground for a paycheck because you never really needed that paycheck to begin with. When these people mock and belittle Trump supporters, you sometimes can't help but hear the classist subtext. The way that they put on a Southern accent when they mock the other side's lack of education, their stupidity, their religion. The message being, don't worry, I belong to your in-group. I'm one of the enlightened few, not one of the foolish masses. This comment from one of my subscribers that I mentioned earlier expressed it well when they continued by saying, quote, "Both poor whites and minorities don't believe the government can or will protect their interests. And they're not crazy to think that way. Yes, conservatives are wrong about a lot. But folks, you've got to understand that they are a product of their environment and social pressures, the same way that inner city youth are. That doesn't mean you have to marry one, but for fork's sake, quit demonizing them and then maybe we'll have a chance of getting their votes back one day." Close quote. That was a bit of a digression, but the point I want to make is about the danger of idealizing and pledging blind loyalty to institutions. Because herein lies the concern. You come to institutions like political parties and religions to help you decide or recognize what is right and wrong. And then those very same institutions become the reason that we exclude, that we judge, and in some cases even that we hurt and kill. This reality necessitates something deeper, a moral system, your own personal non-negotiables that you would follow even if your institutions called upon you to defy them. More on that later. I left the United States in 2018. And since then, my friend group has consisted predominantly of other immigrants and expats. In groups like that, in order for the friend group to function, we do have to abandon some of our most rigid prejudices or political affiliations. Of course we do. Because we share dinner with our own nation's allies and enemies and everything in between, and sometimes we even get along better than we could with our blood families. What I'm describing is the idyllic best-case scenario of people abandoning or even just questioning the in-group, out-group models that they were probably raised with. If you let go of your original party affiliation, your original religion, nation, university, favorite brands, gender and race and football team, then you can begin to choose and rebuild your values based on what you like best, and thus you become the master of your own universe, the Übermensch or Überfrau. My husband and I are from different countries, and we spent our 20s living in a series of different nations, and as a result, we can, in theory, assemble our own home's Franken culture, a little Argentine when we cook meat, a little Colombian when we dance, a little Mexican when we romance each other, and then a little Irish Catholic when we decide that not every emotion needs to be outwardly expressed. In an article I wrote about this concept called All My False Gods, I wrote, quote, "I select my beliefs from different dogmas as if I'm choosing my favorite fruits from various baskets at the market, intentionally and carefully picking up the most delectable philosophies, regardless of which social group they came from," close quote. And wouldn't it be nice if it were really that simple? Letting go of belief sets and admitting that the institutions that once provided your life with structure is liberating and thrilling, sure, but it is also terrifying and exhausting. Institutions are comforting. If I decide that I want to follow my political party's approved list of beliefs, then before an issue even becomes part of the public conversation, somebody in some closed-door room has already decided for me how I should feel about it, and they will report news and pay influencers to inform me accordingly. Cool! For me, that's one less thing to worry about. I've already been told what my opinions are. In the book Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico, which is about expats in Berlin, Latronico writes that the protagonists, quote, "would have liked to have been in their 20s for the summer of '68 or when the wall fell. Previous generations had a much easier time working out who they were and what they stood for. The problems back then might have been more urgent, but they also had clearer solutions. Now there were too many choices, with each one leading off on endless branches, preventing any real change," close quote. That's one aspect that makes it harder to build your own belief set with all of your favorite bits from different political affiliations, different cultures, different religions. It does imply more effort, more time, but to be honest, many humans are actually okay with effort if they feel that it's worth it. What worries me more is that if I am truly intellectually untethered, then I could get sucked up into any belief set that has the strongest gravitational pull. I've heard tell that those most susceptible to joining a cult are precisely those who think they are immune to cult indoctrination. I love the metaphor of choosing my favorite fruits from different baskets at the market, but not all fruits are equal, and you shouldn't treat them as such. We do still need some agreed upon truth, some semblance of objectivity. Otherwise, we'll treat the opinions in a peer-reviewed study from a team of PhDs with the same weight as the opinions in a YouTube video made by a conspiracy theorist who's on the sex offender registry. Even if you hate certain things about institutions and you vow to free yourself from them, it remains true that scientific advancement, records of knowledge, political change, group mobilization, and even things like modern healthcare, a lawful state without widespread anarchy, these things would not be possible without powerful, non-corrupt institutions. And it is a marvel, a testament to human intelligence and social organization that we have even been able to build such powerful institutions, even if they don't always get everything right. And especially when you're young, I think that it's important to be raised with moral framework. When Jordan Peterson was an unknown college professor, he wrote and presented lectures about how our political beliefs can blind us to the evil within ourselves and within our own group. He spoke about how Nietzsche predicted predicted that political affiliations would replace religious affiliation, and that would lead to widespread conflict in the 20th century, a prediction that ultimately came true. Peterson appeared intellectually liberated and coherent. Fast forward a few decades later, and Peterson has identified the North American left as the problematic modern equivalent of the 20th century's most dangerous and violent ideologies. Then, when the January 6th attacks on the Capitol happened, Jordan Peterson struggled in interviews to understand and analyze the act of extremist violence because it hadn't come from the party that he had already identified as problematic. He could not believe that the political right, the party that had rallied around him and supported him when he was shunned and canceled, the party that seemed to have come to represent, in his mind, order and personal responsibility, could turn into the violent, murderous, irrational revolutionary crowd that attacked the US Capitol. Wouldn't an academic who wrote and studied for years the way that normal people can become radicalized through political ideology have been able to predict that? Could it be that his belief that he was immune to political radicalization, exactly what made him susceptible to it? J.K. Rowling wrote one of the most popular book series of all time, with the main message being that everyone has both good and evil in them, and we have to choose to be good, to be loving, even when the crowd disagrees with us.
We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That's who we really are.
Later in her career, J.K. Rowling began to dedicate her public persona to speaking out against transgender people to a point of obsession. Transgender people are an extremely vulnerable minority population, and J.K. Rowling throwing the validity of their very existence into question whenever given the opportunity, and even writing a book about a man who dresses up like a woman to kill women. It does real harm. As Natalie Wynn wrote, quote, "Trans people are a population of people. We are not an ideology that's up for debate," close quote. I can't help but wonder if, in her mind, J.K. Rowling sees herself as Harry when the Daily Prophet made public opinion turn on him, as if she were a misunderstood hero underneath it all, even in her moments of extreme hatefulness. I can't help but wonder if her belief in going against the grain and being a free thinker is exactly what blinds her to the immorality and even the cruelty of her own actions. Maybe she gets a buzz from disagreeing with other intellectuals, but sometimes your critics are right. And just because you're going against the grain doesn't mean that your actions are morally sound. Whether you do everything you can to go with the majority or everything you can to go against the majority, you are still allowing majority opinion to completely dictate your belief set. And in that sense, you are not free. That's one more point that I want to make, which is a common fallacy that I see among those who claim to be free thinkers on the internet, including some of the men in this interview. There is a lot of criticism of universities as biased institutions that limit free speech and attempt to turn people liberal. This criticism especially comes from the disgraced academic crowd. The Jordan Petersons and the Brett Weinsteins, also Candace Owens, has been a huge critic of American universities. But one major fallacy that I see in this line of thought is that the internet, and especially social media, is often treated like the superior alternative, the intellectual playground where you can explore different viewpoints without being brainwashed. And maybe there was a time when the internet was more of a neutral ground, but let's admit that in 2025, social media platforms have become their own majorly powerful institutions with an agenda. On Elon Musk's Twitter, if a user finds themselves curious about talking points on the right, maybe because they're interested in lower taxes or in smaller government, or maybe just because everyone around them is conservative, then their algorithm will almost immediately start to show them barefaced white supremacist, homophobic, sexist propaganda. Just a few years ago, these were considered fringe belief sets, and now they saturate social media. And the effect is that even if people don't agree with these talking points, seeing them so often can normalize them and push the Overton window further toward extremes. And if you aren't anchored in some form of belief set or even some institutions, if you are entirely untethered, then you can easily get pulled down these social media political rabbit holes. We are especially susceptible to this when we're young. And personally, if I, God willing, have children one day, I will prefer if they spend their teen years exploring their opinions and building their core beliefs in a classroom, as opposed to on TikTok. So what are we left with? Like, is there any philosophical approach to being a decent member of society and an intellectually honest thinker? Can we think without cognitive dissonance? I won't speak for others, but Is enlightenment possible, or is it just a delusion? I won't speak for others, but speaking for myself, I have found that I do need almost a list of beliefs and values that are not necessarily aligned with any singular institution, but they should carry the same weight within my person as if they were sourced from a widely recognized and respected institution. I'll call those your core belief set, and they usually take time to develop. When I was in my teens and 20s, it was sometimes frightening to me how quickly my opinions could change, how light and fluid they were, and I sometimes stubbornly held on to certain institutional belief sets to give myself some solid footing, but with time and with experience comes more certainty, and after a little while you can look back retroactively at your behaviors and realize, here's a common thread, okay, I guess that's what I believe. And you can come back to those beliefs in moments of crisis. This is the belief set that you call back on when you are deciding if you agree with a certain institution, if you agree with the actions of the masses, or if you want to be an outlier. The idea is that if pacifism is part of your core belief set, then even if you live in the town where they have the lottery, you would refuse to throw a stone, or maybe publicly advocate against the lottery by sharing social media links to anti-lottery political organizations and anti-lottery infographics. So to bring it back to dating and love and marriage, I don't think that your partner has to align with your in-group. To answer the question that I felt was neglected in this article, I don't think that you have to date within your same political affiliation, nor do you have to date within your same race, religion, nationality, etc. But I do think that you and your partner should align on that core set of beliefs, those beliefs that go deeper than what your institutions and in-groups have told you is important. On the poll that I shared on my profile about if you would date someone who disagrees with you politically, the top comment was, quote, "There's political differences and there's value differences. I support public transportation and I think light rail is great. I would date someone who thinks that increasing bus lines is a better strategy than increasing rail lines. I would not date someone who thinks that climate change is not real or important. I think increasing access to healthcare is important. I think increasing medical school and residency spots could increase provider availability. I would date someone who thinks that increasing the number of PAs is a better way to increase affordable primary care. I would not date someone who thinks poor people should die of preventable illness. I'm happy to date someone who has different political beliefs than I do, but I don't want to date someone with values that conflict with mine." Close quote. This is something that I've dwelled on a lot in the context of my relationship. As I said, my husband and I have the same politics, but we are from different countries. So especially when we first started dating, there were a lot of opinions or ideas that each of us sort of took as a given that were not a given at all to the other person in the relationship. And we had to reconstruct our ideas about expectations and gender norms and family dynamics essentially from zero. And in the midst of these conversations that questioned everything, I remember I started to feel sort of shaken up, and I asked my husband, how do we have any beliefs? Like, if all of them are questionable, is anything true? And my husband was probably 25 at the time, so I'm impressed with the maturity of his response. But he said that you do need to have core beliefs, those beliefs that you don't question anymore. And in the context of our relationship, that core belief that you should never question is that I love you and that I'm not going to stop loving you. Dr. Orna Guralnik from the show Couples Therapy once said in an interview that she used to think that the greatest predictor of success in a marriage was an alignment, like an inherent similarity, but now she believes that the greatest predictor of success in a marriage isn't how similar two people are, but rather how able they are to love despite their differences. Someone messaged me anonymously to share her experience being married to someone who disagrees with her politically, and she said, quote, "I wanted to share privately that I never thought I would date outside of my political beliefs, but my husband of 4 years and I do disagree on things. Notably, our moral and ethical values match completely, but sometimes opinions on policy, role of government, regulations, etc. do differ. I really appreciate it, actually, as he challenges my opinions rather than being an echo chamber and helps me not demonize people who think differently." Close quote. I'm connecting to you as a random person on the internet speaking to probably a stranger to say that what you see on the internet is not an accurate reflection of how different people feel about politics or feel about anything in the world. What you see on the internet is designed to be entertainment, to keep your attention, first and foremost, even if you watch in anger. Now, I am not telling you to marry someone whose politics you are repulsed by. It would be hypocritical of me to give that advice. But I wanted to zoom out in this video because I feel like every time I go on social media, there is somebody trying to convince me to hate someone because they disagree with me, because they are a man, because they're a woman, because they're from somewhere different from me, or because they are a flawed human being. I have had in-person contact with people from all walks of life. I've had the opportunity to know and come to love a diverse collection of people with different thoughts and opinions and quirks and nuances, some of which drive my stubborn self crazy with rage, and it has been one of the greatest gifts I've been afforded in this lifetime. Based on what I see in real life, real stories of people showing up for each other and taking care of each other and seeing past differences, I do not believe that the divided and angry portrayal of human interaction that we see on the internet is accurate. So if you read this article and it made you angry, or if this video is making you angry, or if some other brain rot pissed you off today, just know that one of the most powerful acts of resistance against a social media addicted reality is to not let that anger and hate infect you, and choose instead to be grateful and joyful for your life. I refuse to detest strangers because in my mind they embody some stereotype. I refuse to become hardened and hateful. I refuse to harbor anger toward myself and others. I love mankind. I remain optimistic. As Martin Luther King Jr. said in a big mural in my hometown, quote, "I have decided to stick to love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." Close quote. I am almost certain that there will be people in the comments keen on letting me know that my opinions are overly optimistic and foolish, and I invite you to leave those comments and get it off your chest. I am actually on my belated honeymoon, so I will not be reading the comments much anyway. Saluda.